Drop a like and do share. Leave your comments and do not forget to subscribe for more videos.
Hello students, welcome to dbtable.com, your online gateway to the world of invaluable knowledge. So let's continue with our discussion. In our last discussion, we tried to understand that on the basis of the formula how exactly the compounding interest works. We saw that the principal for the first year, it earns an interest upon herself, and by the end of the first year the total value becomes the original principal plus the interest thereupon. And when we take it further to the second year, at the beginning of the second year, the new principal becomes the old principal for the last year plus whatever interest has been earned thereupon. So the new principal at the beginning of the second year happens to be the old principal as well as the interest. So in a basic conception is that the interest becomes the new principal with every passing year under the concept of compound interest, which is missing in the case of the simple interest. Now, we started our discussion with the help of an illustration. We tried to derive some formula. We tried to derive the formula Fn is equal to P multiplied by 1 plus I raised to the power of n, wherein we tried to understand that Fn refers to the future value of the present cash flow at the end of the nth number of year, and P stands for the current cash flow or the present amount which needs to be compounded at I% rate of interest compounded annually raised to the power of n, where n stands for the number of years for which the compounding needs to be done. We were trying to derive the formula Fn is equal to P within bracket 1 plus I to the power of 1, wherein we came across the question that why exactly we are using 1. Why is it so that we are finding 1 in each and every step? So the conception was very clear. The explanation was very simple, that since the original principal was P, added to the P was P into I. It means P stands for the original principal plus Pi stood for the interest upon, the interest which we are earning upon the existing principal. So the formula was F is equal to P plus P into I, and by using a simple algebra we were taking P as a common, and the common factor was P, and then it was multiplied by 1 plus I, because when P taken common we are left with 1 plus I. Invariably, which means P into 1 is equal to P plus P into I is equal to Pi, which takes us to the original mother formula, which says that Fn is equal to P plus P into I. Now, for the second year, for the beginning of the second year, our new principal became P plus I. Our new principal was P within bracket 1 plus I plus P within bracket 1 plus I multiplied by I, wherein P, we saw that P within bracket 1 plus I was the last year's principal plus interest, and to this, which becomes the new principal for the beginning of the second year, and to this new principal, that is P within bracket 1 plus I, we are multiplying with I% compound interest, which is the new interest which we are getting on the original principal and the interest thereupon. So by the end of the second year, the compounded value shall be F2 is equal to P 1 plus I plus P 1 plus I multiplied by I. This is what we are getting by the end of the second year. We are reaching up to P 1 plus I plus P 1 plus I multiplied by I. Again, a simple algebra. By the end of the second year, P 1 plus I taken common, we are left with 1 plus I. So P 1 plus I taken common, we are left with 1 plus I, because P 1 plus I multiplied by 1 will be P 1 plus I plus P1 plus I multiplied by I shall be P1 plus I multiplied by I. I once again repeat, P1 plus I multiplied with 1 shall be P1 plus I, and plus P1 plus I multiplied by I shall be P1 plus I multiplied by I. Ultimately, by the end of the second year, we are reaching up to a point wherein the F2 stands as P within bracket 1 plus I square, or P1 plus I raised to the power of 2. Why 2? Because we are dealing with the second year, n is equal to 2. Therefore, F2, therefore going by the formula, Fn is equal to P1 plus I to the power of n. Since we are dealing with the second year, by the end of the second year, the formula for compounding in this particular case looks like F2 is equal to P1 plus I raised to the power of 2. Now this f2 is equal to p1 plus I raised to the power of 2 becomes the new principal at the beginning of the third year. At the beginning of the third year, p1 plus I raised to the power of 2 becomes our new principal. A simple explanation has been written over here that this amount received at the end of the second year forms the amount to be invested at the beginning of the third year. As I just said, the amount, which amount? That is f2 is equal to p1 plus I square or raised to the power of 2 received at the end of the second year forms the amount to be invested at the beginning of the third year. From the calculation above, it is clear that the interest has been earned on the principal p1 plus I as well as additional interest has been earned on the interest which has been earned on the principal, that is p1 plus I into I. This is the same thing which I have already explained in the formula, that is f2 is equal to p1 plus I plus within bracket 1 plus I multiplied by I. So the feature f2 p1 plus I whole square or to the power of 2 becomes the starting amount or becomes the original amount or becomes the opening amount at the beginning of the f3. So for the third year, now listen to it very carefully, have a very careful look. For the beginning of the third year, we are having the new principal as p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, that is, this is the amount for the second year to which p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I into I. It means this is the original principal, p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I was the last year's principal, that is the principal which we are, it was a principal plus interest which we earned at the end of the second year, and this, since this becomes a new principal, so within the big bracket p1 plus I within bracket 1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, this is a new principal, and added to it is p again 1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I multiplied by I, that is I stands for the interest which we are earning on the new principal, and this new principal at the beginning of the third year happens to be the closing principal and interest at the end of the second year, which you have already seen in the last slide. Therefore, once again I repeat, therefore for f3 the new principal becomes p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, which is nothing else but it is the principal and interest which we got at the end of the second year. So the principal plus interest obtained at the end of the second year becomes the new principal at the opening of the third year, that is p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, and on this particular principal, that is p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, we are again multiplying it by the I rate of interest, so that by the end of the third year, the amount which we are getting is that p1 plus I 1 plus I plus p1 plus I into 1 plus I into I. It is a simple simplification wherein p taken common 1 plus I into 1 plus I plus p 1 plus I into 1 plus I into I. Therefore, f3 is equal to p 1 plus I whole square plus p1 plus I whole square. f3 is equal to p 1 plus I whole square into 1 plus I. So students, for the third year we are seeing that for the beginning of the third year it was f3 is equal to p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, which was the principal for the last year, the end of second year, and to this new principal we are multiplying by the I% rate of the I% compounded interest for this particular, for the beginning of the third year. That is, for the entire stretch of the third year, the amount shall increase by p1 plus I plus p1 plus I multiplied by I plus again interest on principal, that is p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into multiplied by I. I hope this thing is very clear. I'm just repeating myself once again. At the end of the second year, our new principal was p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I, which becomes the new principal for the beginning of the third year. For the beginning of the third year, our new principal becomes p. The closing principal of the second year becomes the opening principal for the f3 of the third year, which takes the form of p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I. And to this particular new principal, we are multiplying I% rate of interest, which shows that the interest which is being earned on the new principal at the beginning of the third year for the entire stretch of the third year. So the formula becomes p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I plus again p1 plus I plus p1 plus I into I. So therefore, on further simplification, what we are doing, we are taking p1 plus I as common, and then we are left with 1 plus I. Listen to me very carefully. We are taking p1 plus I as a common factor, then we are multiplying it by 1 plus I. In effect, which shows that p1 plus I into 1 is equal to p1 plus I, and p1 plus I into I is equal to p1 plus I into I. Once again, students, p 1 plus I multiplied by I shall be P1 plus I, and P1 plus I multiplied by I shall be P1 plus I multiplied by I. Plus in the second equation also the same thing happens. P1 plus I taken common, we are left with 1 plus I into I. Once again students, P1 plus I taken common, we are left with 1 plus I and multiplied by the I which is outside the bracket, and this particular I which is outside the bracket, it shows the interest earned on the new principal for the entire stretch of the 3 years. So P1 plus I taken common, we're left with 1 plus I multiplied by I. Again at the end of the third year, on further simplification, P1 plus I is equal to P1 plus I whole square, because it is P1 plus I multiplied by P1 plus I. Therefore when the bases are common, our factors are always added back. So P1 plus I to the power of 2, since the base 1 plus I is common, therefore the power should be added. So after adding the power, the bases being equal, it is becoming P1 plus I whole square plus P1 plus I whole square multiplied by I. Now again at the end of the third year, F3, on further simplification we find that P1 plus I whole square taken common, P1 plus I whole square taken common, we are left with 1 plus I. So P1 plus I whole square taken common, we are left with P1 plus I whole square into 1 plus I. So finally what we get, P3 is equal to P1 plus I whole square into 1 plus I, which again we are reaching to a condition wherein, since the base is common, that is 1 plus I is common under both the cases, so the powers are being added, that is 2 and I is equal to 3. Therefore F3, or the final amount or the final future amount at the end of F3, shall be P1 plus I cube or P1 plus I raised to the power 3. So Fn is equal to P1 plus I to the power of n takes the form of F3 is equal to P1 plus I to the power of 3, or we can say that at the end of the third year, the original principle with which we started at the beginning of the third year, it has grown by I% rate of interest compounded annually, and finally we are reaching to a position wherein F3 is equal to P1 plus I raised to the power of 3. Now the same concept lingers on for the fourth year as well. For the fourth year, what happens? For the fourth year, whatever principal and interest has been earned at the end of the third year becomes the new principal at the beginning of the fourth year. I once again repeat students, for the beginning of the fourth year, whatever principal and interest has been earned by the end of the third year becomes the opening principal for the beginning of the fourth year. So for the beginning of the fourth year, the opening principal becomes P1 plus I whole cube. So the new principal at the beginning of the fourth year is P1 plus I whole cube. And obviously P1 plus I whole cube need not to be said that this happens to be the principal which we got at the end of the third year. So for F4 is the new principal is P1 plus I to the power of 3 plus to this new principal P1 plus I to the power of 3, we are multiplying it by I, or I happens to be the new interest which we are supposed to get on the principal, on the new principal of P1 plus I3. I hope this is clear students. Once again let me repeat myself. For the fourth year, at the beginning of the fourth year, original investment of the P becomes P1 plus I whole cube, which was the last principal which we got at the end of the third year. So this becomes the opening principal for the fourth year, that is P1 plus I to the power of 3, plus on this new principal, that is P1 plus I to the power of 3, we are multiplying it by I, which shows that on the for the entire stretch of the fourth year, the principal P1 plus I to the power of 3 shall be growing by I% rate of interest compounded annually. So therefore the formula again becomes P1 plus I whole cube plus P1 plus I whole cube into I. Therefore P4 will be P1 plus I taken common, it shall be 1 plus I. I once again repeat a simple factorization. P1 plus I taken common, we are left with P1 plus I whole cube plus 1 plus I, which means that upon simplification it will be P1 plus I whole cube plus P1 plus I whole cube into I. Upon simplification it will become P1 plus I whole cube into 1 is equal to P1 plus I whole cube plus P1 plus I whole cube into I will become P1 plus I whole cube into I. Again we are reaching to a conclusion wherein, since the bases are common, that is in both the cases the base is 1 plus I and base is 1 plus I, therefore the power shall be added. Therefore for over here the power is 3 and over here the power is 1. Therefore for fourth year it will be, at the end of the fourth year, the final future value will be P1 plus I raised to the power of 4. So we find that what started off at the first year, at the beginning of the first year, what started off with P, that is closing by the end of the fourth year as P1 plus I to the power of 4. It means the principal down the 4 years, all through the 4 years, the principal has swelled up, or it has increased by the way of interest being added to it, and for the beginning of the every successive years, the closing principal and interest is becoming the new principal for the beginning of the second year or the successive year. So when the new principal is adding up in value, when the new principal is increasing with the interest which is being added back to it, for the beginning of the next successive years, the original principal with which we are starting, it is obviously more than the principal of the preceding year. Whatever principal we are starting off at the beginning of the successive year is bound to be more than the principal of the previous year, because by the end of the previous year the principal is going up, or it is going up in value, it is swelling up in value by the I% rate of interest which is being added to it. So this additional feature is simply adding as a multiplying effect. It is giving a compounding effect to the future value of the present investments which we are making today. So at the end of the fourth year, or the end of the n number of years, whatever corpus we are creating, whatever future value which we are getting against the current investment of the P at the present time against the I% rate of interest compounded annually for n number of years, it is simply going up into a huge amount only due to the power of compounding, or only due to the benefit of the compounding. Thus, for n number of years, the future value at the end of Tn shall be Fn is equal to P1 plus I raised to the power of n. So this simple derivation has been done by looking at the formula for the previous years. We found that what we started off at the end of the T1 as P, it has grown to size at the end of the F1 is equal to P1 plus I to the power of n. I hope this simple calculation is clear to you all, and you might have found it lucid and quite very easy to understand. That's all for now, students. Happy learning, students. Thank you.